ask for the courtesy of the board member, staff, and those that are participating electronically that you please silence your cell phones. We are about to start the meeting. Good morning and welcome to the Orange County Board's work session, which has been scheduled today for the purpose of discussing legislative update and budget. The public will not have an opportunity to participate in the work session to provide public comment because this is not a regularly scheduled board meeting. No action will be taken, and there will be no pre-agenda period in which the public normally addresses the school board on germane topics that are related to the work of the board. Board members are attending in person or telephonically, so I will take roll call. Chair Jacobs? Chair Jacobs? All right, we'll come back. Member Gallo?
Present.
Member Lopez? Member Cobert?
Good morning.
Great. Member Felder?
Good morning.
Member Dr. Castor-Dental?
Good morning.
Member Byrd?
Good morning.
Chair Jacobs?
I apologize.
No,
I'm here. Thank you.
no worries, and myself. I want to remind the public that the board members will not be engaging in outside electronic or digital communication during the meeting so that we can focus on the meeting itself, given our attention to this matter immediately before us. Should you want to contact us, please continue to do so before or after each meeting. To my fellow board members and district staff, when speaking, please make sure your microphone is turned on and speak directly into it, or so that our YouTube and Orange TV viewers can hear you clearly. At this time, I would like us to stand for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Jenkins, legislative update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have, first of all, our Chief Communications Officer, Scott Howard, who also supervises our legislative arm, will be giving you a brief summary of the legislative update. Apologies to anyone who did actually hear the update that was offered in Tampa. We will be as brief as possible. Following that, we will be ready to go through our initial operating and capital budget work session for your information and for any additional input. As the chairman has indicated, there is no actual action being taken. You will have a subsequent public hearing for your budget in weeks to come. Included in the budget will also be our latest ESSER update from Dr. Schuler and others from Dr. Vasquez's team. So let's go ahead and get started with the legislative update. Madam Chair, if we can, I'd like to just have questions after the legislative update briefly from the board or any discussion, and then move into budget and get through the entire budget, including ESSER, and then have any questions or comments there, and actually any input from the board on any recommendations for priorities for this coming year. You will hear that there's not surplus dollars just sitting around for us to have that kind of discussion, but we will certainly have that at the end of the second presentation.
Is that all right with the board? Just a nod is good. And if there's any objection from the chair or member Colbert, please let me know.
All right,
Great.
let's begin.
Let's move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I'm going to present the 2021 legislative session update today to just do a really brief overview of the state budget. I know you're going to hear much more detail on the district budget and the impact that Doreen will give later today after me, but I'll go ahead and give you the state budget information and then move into some substantive bills, kind of the more important bills that have passed, and then there'll be a list at the end. I'm happy to answer questions at that time. Starting with the state budget, Enrollment projections for the state is at 54,260. That's 1.93% increase in full-time equivalent or students. Statewide, we have $22.8 billion more in the FEFP this year, or total, $12.9 billion in state funds and $9.9 billion in local funds. That's an increase in the total FEFP of $315 million, or 1.4% over the current year. The base student allocation provided an increase of $53.42, or a total of $4,372.91 per student. The required local effort, the millage is at 3.720. That's maintaining the current 2021 average millage rate statewide. The per student funding of $7,795 is actually a decrease over the adjusted fourth calculation, $203.29, or 2.54% decrease. Some of the categoricals that increased in the state budget, we have $20 million additional in mental health assistance. Teacher salary increase was $50 million to a total of $550 million in the categorical. That's up $50 million over last year. And a new student reserve allocation, which is included in the FEFP at $464.3 million. That is to offset the increase in any additional students that come through either the voucher program or into school districts. That is set aside as a reserve. The class size reduction categorical was reduced by $308 million statewide. That's a significant decrease in class size funding, specifically around the early grades, K through 3. Go on to the substantive bills. Sure. Can you hear me in the room? Okay. Yeah. Let me move this pad. Okay, substantive bills. House Bill 5 is civics education. This requires the Department of Education to develop an approved integrated civics education curriculum for public schools, kindergarten through grade 12. It establishes the Portraits and Patriotism Act, and also requires that anyone receiving or getting the U.S. government course for a standard diploma must include a comparative discussion of political ideologies, and if approved, this would become law as of July 1, 2021. Legal notices. House Bill 35 provides for the option for government agencies to advertise on newspaper websites instead of paper-based publications. That determination does need to be made by a majority vote of the governing board, or school board in this case. It does expand the types of qualifications for the legal notices, the papers or publications that would qualify. And it does require that the Press Association ensure that minority populations have equitable access to these legal notices. It was approved by the governor and will go into effect January 1st, 2022. The COVID civil liability bill, Senate Bill 72, protects education institutions and other businesses against claims arising from its employees or customers, clients who became ill or have died due to COVID. The claims must be made within 1 year of the act becoming law or the event, and the education institution is provided affirmative defenses. This bill was approved by the governor during session April 29th and was effective immediately. Senate Bill 146, civics literacy, requires that the commissioner develop a minimum criteria for civics literacy practicum. That practicum would include civic engagement activities that could count towards community service requirements for Florida Bright Futures Scholarship. It also encourages the school districts to include and accept civic literacy practicum activities and hours towards any academic awards or community service type awards. And it creates a Citizen Scholar Program and authorizes high school students completing the program to receive up to 6 undergraduate credit hours. And if this is approved, it will take effect July 1. House Bill 149 prohibits the seclusion of students. This is the restraint and seclusion bill that had been actually proposed the last several years. It prohibits the seclusion. It does give some restrictions on the restraint on students with an IEP. It provides the DOE and school district and school personnel certain requirements under the bill. There is a provision in there for placement of a video camera in a classroom. This was specified towards Broward County, and it requires continuing education and in-service training for the teaching of students with emotional or behavioral disabilities. And this does take effect July 1. House Bill 157, first aid training in schools, requires school districts to provide basic first aid training, CPR, for students in grades 9 and 11th grade. Encourages school districts to provide basic first aid education, including CPR, for grades 6 and 8. And that's requires at the high school level and encourages at the middle school level. CPR instruction must be based on a 1-hour nationally recognized training. And that would go into effect July 1 as well. House Bill 173 on IP requirements modifies communication and timeline provisions for successful transition of students with disabilities to post-secondary. That transition starts in 7th grade, or when the child would turn the age of 12, whichever occurs first, and then have an operational plan in place for the first day of the student's high school year, or age 14, whichever occurs first. School districts must provide his or her parent information on transition services. This would go into effect July 1 as well. 241, Parents' Bill of Rights. This combines parental rights in various sections of statutes into one place, primarily impacts healthcare and education. It requires parents to have access to all student records and provides methodology for parents to opt out of certain instruction for their students. A lot of the pieces of this bill were already in place. They brought them together into one place. There's more provisions in there that are designed to give parents rights when it comes to medical attention of their children, as well as access to medical or to educational records as well. House Bill 259, Safety of Religious Institutions. This allows a licensee to carry a concealed firearm or, for any lawful purpose on property that is used or owned by a church, synagogue, or other religious institution. How this would affect the school district is if we rent facilities to a church or a synagogue or a religious institution, the interaction of this bill and what we could or could not do as far as the prevention of firearms or concealed weapons on campus. This was an issue that was raised by FAD's attorney when we did the briefing, and just wanted to bring it to your attention. This is something that we'll have to work through. House Bill 311, Public Records and Assessment Instruments. This expands the scope of existing public records to exempt to an exemption that covers examinations and assessment instruments, the kindergarten screening, any of the FSA instruments, any of the results of those, including teacher certification. It would exempt all of those from public access. House Bill 429 is Purple Star Campuses. This is a program that would recognize and support military-connected children. The school could be designated as a Purple Star campus, and then they would have to do specific things: host an annual military recognition event, partner with a school liaison officer from a military institution, or support projects that connect the school with the military community and provide outreach to military parents and children. The state board will adopt rules to implement this program. House Bill 519 requires health education instruction. It modifies required instruction for members of instructional staff of public schools. General health education curriculum for kindergarten through 12 must be developmentally appropriate, age appropriate, and include information on child sexual abuse, exploitation, and human trafficking. It shifts health education instruction on abstinence and consequences of teenage pregnancy from kindergarten to age 12 to 6 through 12. House Bill 529, moment of silence. The governor signed this bill yesterday. This will require principals to require teachers to set aside time for a moment of silence in school. The assumption would be at the beginning of school, in line with the Pledge of Allegiance. It prohibits teachers from making suggestions of any type of reflection. It deletes the provision authorizing district school boards to provide a brief period of silent prayer meditation, and requires certain teachers encourage parents and or guardians to discuss the moment of silence with their children and how they can best use that time. Reproductive health and disease education, this goes along with, pairs with the other bill. It requires that districts notify parents of public school students of their right to exempt their child from the teaching of reproductive health or any disease through a written request. The district must have the information on the front page of their website as to how they can opt out, and must also annually approve the instructional materials used to teach reproductive health or any disease prevention in an open and publicly noticed meeting. Senate Bill 590, school safety, revises notification requirements that must be met for involuntary examination. This is also a Baker Act bill of a minor. It requires school safety officers to undergo crisis intervention training. Principals who contact any known emergency contact can only share necessary information to alert the parent or caregiver, and requires that the code of conduct include provisions relating to civil citations and similar pre-arrest diversion programs. It allows school district board policy to provide accommodation for drills conducted by exceptional education centers. This goes into effect July 1, 2021. Senate Bill 922, veterans hiring preferences, expands the benefit of veterans' preference in employment, authorizes the waiving of post-secondary educational requirements, and the waiver can take place for a member of a reserve unit of the United States Armed Forces, a current member of the Florida National Guard, or a veteran that is honorably discharged. The waiver is not available for a position that's designated as exempt. So these are some changes in the vet hiring preferences, and it was approved by the governor effective July 1, 2021. House Bill 1028 authorizes university and Florida college system institutions to sponsor charter schools. It provides changes to charter school applications, contracts, and enrollments, as well as terminations. The new provisions for a charter school to be designated as high-performing may have 2 open applications at one time, and it changes the Schools of Hope to be a local education agency, or LEA, and they would be eligible for capital outlay and complete their own background screenings. Parent or guardians can request by June 30th under this bill for their K-12 public school student to be retained for academic reasons for the 2021-22 school year. This bill also created and was added towards the end of session the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which required interscholastic, intercollegiate, intramural club teams or sports sponsored by the public secondary school or public post-secondary institution to be designated as male, female, or co-ed on the biological sex at birth of team members, specifies that athletic teams or sports teams for females or women or girls may only be open to students of that sex, and then may not be open to students of the male sex, and modifies other educational provisions. It authorizes high-performing school districts to provide up to 2 days of virtual instruction as part of their 180-day school year, authorizes school district boards and special advisory committees to meet remotely, and requires, beginning 2022-23, public schools to provide information to the important role of water safety and swimming lessons in saving lives. This goes into effect July 1st, 2021. Senate Bill 1108 revises laws relating to graduation requirements. It requires that districts offer SAT or ACT to all 11th grader, to every 11th grader free of charge, subject to an appropriation. It amends civic literacy requirements for post-secondary. It creates a process for students in high school to earn civic literacy requirement before enrolling in public college or university. And it requires that grades 3 through 6 standardized assessments be paper-based. It also requires that character education for 11th and 12th grades include instructions on voting using the uniform primary and general election ballot. And it allows students participating in ESOL program to demonstrate grade level expectations on formative assessments in lieu of passing the grade 10 ELA. And if approved by the governor, it would take effect July 2021. The last bill, House Bill 7045, school choice, streamlines the voucher options for students. It repeals the Gardner Scholarship and transitions students to the Florida Empowerment Scholarship. It revises current scholarship amounts for McKay and transitions students to the FES on July 1st, 2022 from McKay. Revises requirements for FES by expanding the eligibility for dependents of members of the U.S. Armed Forces, siblings of a student with a disability, receiving an FES scholarship, and removing prior public attendance requirement and eliminating the need for scholarships to renew the program participation for an existing student seeking that choice. Expands eligibility to students with disabilities to receive the higher of the calculated amounts or the current amount. It transitions the funding of the scholarships to the dependent on the student's matrix of services, and it establishes the initial maximum capacity of 20,000 students from 18,000. It excludes students from the maximum if a student with a disability who's received specialized instruction in VPK, attended public school in the prior year, are a dependent of a child of a member of the Air Armed Forces, a foster child, or an adopted child, and a student who seeks McKay Scholarship for the 2021-22 school year. Revises the frequency of the audits for the program from every year to every 3 years, and increases the scholarship amounts for the programs. It requires all FES scholarships to be funded in the FEFP with state funds only, cannot use local funding, must be state funds only, and if approved, and it was approved by the governor and is effective July 1, 2021. Some additional bills, these are bills that also passed that I've listed here that have some impact on the district. I did go over these bills yesterday with our BPOs and have sent out implementing charts on the bills so they could go through those in detail and make sure that we're picking up on nuances. Many of these bills are still in transition between the legislature and the governor, and once the governor signs them, we'll start getting more guidance from the department as far as how some of these bills will be implemented. I will turn it back over to Dr. Jenkins for comments.
Thank you, Mr. Howitt. Madam Chair, we are certainly open to your questions and any discussion at this point on the legislative update.
Thank you. Members on the line, please text Dr. Williams, and she will put you in queue. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a couple of questions. The, no, I gotta remember. The millage, the 3.72 millage, so does that mean there was no rollback this year?
No rollback.
That's pretty good. That's the first in how many years? We'll get to that
Too
later.
many to count.
Yeah, that's what I figured. And then there was the 2.4% decrease that we saw in the FTE per student. Was that due to the decrease, the 10% decrease in the class size allocation? And what was there, do we know what the reason why they decreased the class size allocation? Was that due to the lack of students or the decrease in students that we'll be getting?
So a couple of things. Many of the districts have gone to school-wide average under the school choice, district choice option. So they've been able to do or expand to school choice. So in order to do that, I guess looking for ways to cut the funding and look at the formulas, the K through 3 amounts that would be set aside for class size compliance at a class by class 18-to-1 was significantly decreased to what it had been previously.
Okay, so because, well, in Orange County, we're a choice district. So we can go by school-based class size versus individual class size, correct?
Yes, by, under the changes in the law previously that allowed for the flexibility in that case, yes.
So the 4.64.3 million, if we were to get more students coming in than we anticipated, would we be able to use some of that money to meet class size, school-wide class size averages?
The student reserve allocation was set aside in order to prevent a proration potentially later on, mainly because of increase in vouchers, in the number of vouchers potentially taken that could drain the funding away from districts. So that money is set aside in order to fund that back, potentially, whether it's vouchers or an increase in enrollment. If we we're projected at just over 4,000 students in Orange County, if we end up with 6,000 and there's a proration, they, instead of reducing every district based on the proration, they can access that new student allocation reserve.
Okay. So in essence, if we get more kids and we can't meet class size, then it would technically come out of that because we would get an increase for our FTE.
Yeah. What would have been preferable if that money was just in the FEFP and then we got a proration, so we had a higher per student to begin with, and then allowed that to, but that's not the way they decided to do the money,
No,
that funding.
yes, okay. And then on 259, so during the committee weeks, there was a lot of discussion and many different groups argued the fact that school districts rent to churches. We, in Orange County, also rent to churches. And both sponsors, Senator Gruder and Representative Williamson, were asked that question, and their response to both was it wouldn't affect any lease that was currently in place, that they're not getting into contract law, and that this language in the bill would not supersede the district's ability to put whatever they needed to in the lease so there wasn't guns on their campus. Is that the way that we are interpreting that? Or, because I kept arguing that may be your intention, but that's not what's in policy. That's not what this bill says.
Yeah, so the bill it says that it doesn't limit private property rights, which, obviously this is publicly owned property, but I think what they're saying, it may be more of a situation where we can put it in those contracts on our end, but it's a communication piece, because if now the general public thinks that they can conceal carry into a church, synagogue, or religious institution, and they're going to their Sunday church meeting at a school site, just making sure that that is well communicated, that would be prohibited because it is a school campus. There is federal law around prohibition of carrying a weapon within even 1,000 feet of a school campus. If I'm not correct, there is the laws were passed back in the 90s around that. So, but so I don't know that would supersede that either. But it's just a matter of perception and making sure the communication is very clear as to if the church is holding their services on campus, that would be prohibited, but it doesn't allow for that within the bill. So
Would we be allowed just to post signs on our campuses for those that rent to churches saying no guns allowed? So
I
that
think
it's very
those signs
clear?
are posted.
The
They are
sign's already
posted.
there, and the plan is, we were working with some other districts. Sorry, I'm going to clear myself. We've been working with some other districts, and the plan is to write that into our facility use agreements so that it's clear, and that's pretty much consistent throughout the state with our districts that we've spoken to.
Awesome. And then my very last question is 1028. Does that mean that we no longer have to meet quorum in person to meet?
That's a good question. I don't know that, it said it wasn't it was for committees and other, I'd have to look into that, into the specifics of that. We haven't received any guidance on that specifically.
Because I thought it
but
said school
it
board.
gave some flexibility though in quorum requirements, so I need to look at that a little bit more closely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Gallo. Also, there is coffee in the back for anybody who's interested. Member Castro Dental.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Scott, for spending time in Tallahassee and suffering through that legislative session to bring us this information. I have a question about the mental health assistance program, the $20 million that they gave in addition. What percentage of that are we going to receive of the 20 million?
Actually, Doreen Concolino and will cover the amount. I think it's about 1.3 million, roughly, that would come to, if I recall, I think that was the amount.
Okay.
Anyway, she'll cover the exact amount, but yes, we will get our proportionate share of those dollars through the mental health assistance categorical.
And are those restricted to hiring personnel, or did they say how we're allowed to spend that money?
I think it's a flow through in the same way that it would be spent last year. Let me see, it's 1.2 million, actually. I have the information here for Orange County. And I think it's designed to, the expenditures the same way as been expended in the past.
Okay, thank you. And this is not a significant question, but the moment of silence, did the legislature indicate how long the moment is to be?
It's 1 to 2 minutes.
Wow.
So we're going to be working with schools to make sure that we still have the correct number of instructional minutes.
Okay, 1 to 2 minutes can be a really long time for a kindergartner to stand still. Okay. And then the Schools of Hope capital outlay access, would that apply to the new School of Hope we have, the Matter Academy in Apopka?
It would apply to, the legislation was designed to change any schools of hope into an LEA, and they're therefore giving them that access to capital outlay from the beginning.
Okay.
I don't think it's I don't think it's prospective. I think it's any schools of hope.
And we only have the one right now, the School of Hope in our district, I think.
I believe so.
Okay. My last question is about the House Bill 7045 for school choice. The private school tuition, now we will be able, or people who are already attending private schools would have access to those dollars, even if they've never gone to a public school or applied for this voucher before. They can just kind of use the public funds to supplement their own private education?
Essentially, by removing the prior public, that's what they were intending. There is a cap on the numbers, but I think they're, because of the eligibility requirements and the expansion, that's a good possibility.
All right, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Member Felder?
Thank you. I just have a question about House Bill 241, when it talks about Parents' Bill of Rights with regards to the access to all student records. So now I just want to ask the question, suppose there's a situation where only the mother has legal guardianship of the father, and the one that doesn't have the legal guardianship, will they too have a right to the students' records? That wasn't, unless I missed something, because I know that in past as a teacher, sometimes it's not indicated in the records. They don't, parents, whoever's in charge, don't come and update the records, and a father or a mother may call, and sometimes it's not at our hand who specifically has legal guardianship. We see that these two people are listed as parents, and we release the information or talk about the student's progress or non-progress. And teachers sometimes are reprimanded by parents saying that that's, they can't do this. So I just needed, is that going to be explained specifically, or is it the board's decision here in Orange County to make that distinction, or how are we going to do that? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
I do.
Okay.
I would defer to general counsel on that. This bill would really just grants the access to parents, whether the definition of who can, I would defer to.
Madam Chair, is it okay if I respond?
Yes, please do.
Member Felder, under FERPA, if they are the parent of the child, they are entitled to the records, which I'm sure you know of. When we get something that's out of the ordinary from like perhaps a non-custodial parent or someone we have not yet known to the school, we do make sure that there's no termination of parental rights and those kind of things. If there's termination of parental rights, then that non-custodial parent is not entitled to the records. But we look at those very carefully when they come in.
What did you just say? If there's no what?
If there's no termination of parental rights.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes when parents are split, one parent their rights may have been terminated, but that's when their parental rights are terminated,
Then
then
you don't
also
share
their right
those
of
grades.
access is terminated.
Yeah, I wanted to be clear because I know that it happens. I'm sure you all know that happens. And sometimes teachers are caught in between, if you know what I'm saying. Their only concern is to make sure the child is doing well, and whoever calls first, you know what I'm saying? They just, okay. So the next question, thank you. The next question I have is regarding the teaching. It's still House Bill 241 with regards to parents have a right regarding certain instruction. Could you explain to me what instruction you're talking about? Certain subject matters, a certain curriculum, or explain? Let me just wait. Let me see you explain that to me, then maybe I may not have a question.
It's certain opt-out provisions within the instruction, like what I talked about in the health instruction and disease prevention instruction, to give parents the right to
Talk about
to
more
opt out
specific
of
kinds of
to get a
things.
waiver. Yeah, so their children aren't necessarily exposed to that type of instruction. So that's what it's referencing. That's what it's
Okay,
talking-
because I was thinking about with regards to literature, some parents, they may not want certain curriculum to be taught to their student, because I'm going back on my personal background and experience, that you teach certain African American literature. You teach it, some parents may not like it, or they may not want you. If you're teaching a course in world geography, and there's a section on religion, and you talk about Islam in terms of the lesson, you know what I'm saying? And some parents have an issue, and I just wanted to know, when I communicate to members of my constituency that are teachers, they have that concern. Is that what you're talking about? And you're saying no, because if it's in the curriculum and they're following the CRMs, you know what I'm saying, the objectives, then I think in the past teachers have had that leeway, but also parents do also have a right, if there's certain type of literature that they don't want their children to be exposed to. I just don't want teachers to be in a position where they're intimidated because they're teaching literature at my time. But could you please answer that for me? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look into that a little bit more.
Look at it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay, that is a concern that I have for teachers. All right, okay.
Absolutely.
Because parents can come back to that, my Bill of Rights, and they do have a right. You understand? So I want to make sure that's clear, so when I communicate it to members of my constituency, I can be clear on what that means. All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Member Felder. Member Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Howitt, for the update. I just have two quick questions. Member Gallo asked about the quorum requirements. Do we know if that will include for school SAC committees? I know we have been requiring them to be in person now. And the reason I ask is because a lot of schools really, really struggle to get that in-person quorum. So if we could allow online quorum, that would be fantastic for many of our schools.
Yeah, I think getting a little bit more guidance on those provisions from the department and state board, I think would be helpful. But certainly that's definitely a concern. I think some of the committees and committee work and things would be helpful. So I think having that in there at least lends some discussion around that and what can be. But we'll look into that.
Yeah, that'd be
Work with-
great. I mean, I have a school that has money in their sack that they can't spend because they haven't been able to get a quorum all year. So,
Great point.
my last question is about House Bill 1028. And we don't have to get in the weeds about this, but I'm just curious. Are we going to require students, are we required now to ask students to show a birth certificate when they register for a sport? Or when they want to sign up for a sport? Or do we already? I don't know if that's something we already do or not.
I mean,
Do we have any idea how that's going to work yet? Or are we not in the,
well, I think
Yeah.
the FHSA is working through that right now. They actually they were addressing some issues that were actually part of the Parent Bill of Rights issue that they just resolved, and I think they're working through some of the provisions within 1028. But I think it'll be having to present a birth certificate would be part of that requirement.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Member Lopez.
Chair Goal. Thank you so much for the presentation, first of all. I have questions on 3 bills, the HB 149, Students with Disabilities, and the HB 173, IEP requirements. So both of the bills are saying that are going to take place on July 1st, 2021. That means that this will be effective in our school system. So are we going to provide information to our parents about these bills, about the cameras? Can you please explain a little bit more with about the 149 and 173?
Sure. So they do go into effect July 1. We will receive additional guidance from the department on this bill specifically and implementation. There are some requirements around, well, it prohibits seclusion with an exception. There's some exceptions in there around, I think, timeout is allowed for. So the definitions around that and as far as what the guidance is, the use of restraints, many of which, and the things that have been banned, we aren't using anyway. A lot of the things that they enumerate and talk about in the bill, there is some training and there are some concerns around using restraint, say in a general area where you're not, say, there's an altercation between 2 students and you're not sure which one is an ESE student or which one isn't, who can do that restraining of separating the students if they were involved in some kind of an altercation. So I think there needs to be some direction around that as well. And that certainly was part of the discussions around this bill and has been in the past. So
And what about the cameras inside certain classrooms?
that's that's a Broward County issue. It's a pilot that they're doing there. So it doesn't affect, that would not affect us this year, although depending on what kind of, information is reported out of that, they could look to expand that or offer that out. But that doesn't impact us, that part of the bill. I just put it in there because it's something that was part of the bill and was something that either Broward advocated for or somebody in Broward advocated for that Broward County schools to have that. So.
And about the school district providing information on transition services and programs for our IEP IEP students, thinking in Spanish all the time. IEP students in high school when they start in 7th grade, I believe. How is going to work?
Yeah, so I'm confident we will get direction on that as far as the transition process. The idea was to build out a career plan, for our students that are on an IEP, what that path would look like starting in 7th grade or age 12th, and then have it in place by high school. So there's some kind of a direction outlined, and so I'm sure there'll be further guidance in regards to that. But that's the intent, was to create a pathway, so a career pathway.
Oh,
And if I can jump in there already, ESE, the team, they're already planning to train personnel on these particular aspects.
perfect. And the last one is the last questions is about SB 1108, education. With the last point that is describing allows certain students participating in the ESOL program to demonstrate grade level expectations on formative assessments in lieu of passing the grade 10 ELA assessment. Can you please explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So there's been a lot of discussion in Tallahassee around new arrivals being required to pass the 10th grade ELA without being exposed to the to ESOL classes or have access to that over time. So the idea was to provide some alternatives to them having to pass the 10th grade ELA in order to graduate. And so this gives some provision in law to make that happen.
So do we have any official ways of assess them?
It says through a formative assessment, so it's not, it didn't identify any specifics, but I'm sure we'll get guidance on which alternatives could be used in lieu of the 10th grade ELA.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes our questions about this. Does anybody need a comfort break before we get into the budget discussion? Yes, okay, 2 minutes.
That gives us time to switch out speakers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's on BoardDocs.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. Great information.
We'll give it one more minute. All right, we are back together and about ready to start. Dr. Jenkins, are we ready to move on to the budget? We're ready. Dr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is time for your initial school board work session on your operating and capital budget, as mentioned earlier. Doreen Conkerline and Judith Padres will be walking us through operating and then capital budget. And then we will have some further enlightenment on our ESSER dollars, which can impact our budget significantly as well. I would ask that you take notes as we get through the capital and operating budget. That's a good breaking point, Madam Chair. And then as we set up for the, just a brief review of ESSER, we can take any additional questions at that point. With that, your acting CFO, Ms. Conkerline, take it away.
Good morning. Today, we're bringing you your school board work session on your operating and capital budget. Our agenda today will be to review the operating budget, review the capital budget, and our next steps. We'll begin with the budgetary landscape. There is a lot of budgetary information that I will share with you. And then there will be 2 slides presented that should help bring it all together. Our projected enrollment is 204,857 FTE, or full-time equivalent, which is an increase of 4,006 students over the fourth calculation of the prior year of 200,851 FTE. The FEFP, or Florida Education Finance Program funding, for 2022 stands at $7,765 per student for OCPS. Typically, the budget is presented to you as a comparison to the second calculation of the prior year and is what we have built our budget on historically. In this comparison, there's a per-student funding increase of $18.97, or less than 0.25% increase over the prior year second calculation. Because of the adjustments made to the prior year fourth calculation, there is an overall decrease in funding of $26.9 million, or 1.67%, or a reduction of $289 per student for OCPS, or 3.59%. The combination of an increase in enrollment along with a decrease in overall funding results in a decrease in per-student funding. The most noteworthy aspect of the new budget is the elimination of the hold harmless provision, or $54.6 million for OCPS. The hold harmless provided a substantial increase in per-student funding in the prior year. It is clear that the hold harmless provisions of the Commissioner's executive order saved the district from adverse consequences from the loss of enrollment due to COVID-19. However, it is also clear, whether we compare total new funding to the FEFP second or fourth calculations for 2020-2021, that the first calculation for FY 2022 will provide less funding than in 2021. The legislative budget includes another significant increase in the FRS rates, which will increase our retirement costs by $8.4 million to the general fund. If we add in food and nutrition services as well as grants, the total impact is $9.5 million to all funds. The base student allocation will increase $53 per student, or just over 1%, to $4,373 per student. This increase would have provided a much-needed boost in revenue to support the increase in FRS rates. However, along with the increase in BSA is also a significant decrease in class size funding of $308 million statewide to all districts, or $25.5 million to OCPS, exacerbating what is already, from an operational standpoint, a difficult year financially. The PK-3 class size rate has decreased by more than $317 per FTE, where grades 4 through 8 and grades 9 through 12 each increased by approximately $52 per FTE. Overall, $16.9 million of the $25.5 million reduction is a result of rate changes. The balance of the funding loss, $8.6 million, is due to FTE changes since the class size appropriation was left unchanged in 2021 and calculated based on 209,400 FTE. As you know, categorical funds are restricted and must be spent as intended. The legislative budget includes an incremental increase in the teacher's salary categorical funding of $3.2 million. The other notable increase to OCPS is approximately $1.2 million in the mental health assistance allocation. The increase in restricted categorical appropriations is included in our total funding loss. Thankfully, our local citizens value public education and continue to support the local millage. Special millage. Slide 6. This slide and the next were created to provide a visual summary of the district's funding and enrollment changes. The top graph represents the change in funding. It begins with the prior year's second calculation, where funding exceeded $1.621 billion, and the district was operating under the assumption of the hold harmless order. The fourth calculation funding of $1.617 billion includes the hold harmless funding and accounts for the proration or reduction that was imposed in order to fund those districts that actually experienced growth. OCPS realized a proration or reduction of $4.3 million. Next, there is the new 2022 funding of $1.59 billion. As you can see, there is a decline in total dollars. The bottom graph represents the changes in enrollment. The second calculation identifies our 2021 forecast of 209,400 FTE. The fourth calculation pinpoints actual enrollment of 200,851 FTE. And then lastly, our 2022 forecast of 204,857 FTE, an increase of 4,006 students over the fourth calculation of the prior year. Overall, there is a decrease in funding that is primarily the result of the decrease in class size appropriation. We will have less dollars to fund the increase in students, as well as the increase in retirement costs. This slide ties together OCPS funding and enrollment for a comparison of per-student funding. First, you can see the 2021 second calculation, where a forecast of 209,400 FTE results in per-student funding of $7,746. The next point is the fourth calculation, with an actual enrollment of 200,851 FTE, and including the hold harmless and proration, resulting in $8,054 in per-student funding. And finally, the 2022 first calculation, with an enrollment forecast of 204,857 FTE and per-student funding of $7,765. For the 2022 school year, there is a projected growth in students with a reduction in funding of $289 per student. As mentioned previously, most of the reduction in funding is attributable to the significant decrease in class size funding. Simply put, more students with less money. Here is our actual FTE for past years, along with the projection for next year. Our current projection for FY22, as just noted, is 204,857 FTE, an increase of 4,006 FTE over the fourth calculation of 200,851. This forecast incorporates all K-12 students, including charter school, McKay, and family empowerment scholarship students. However, it does not include VPK students. It is worth noting the legislature has passed House Bill 7045, which eliminated the Gardner Scholarship Program and will fold the Gardner Scholarship students into each district's FTE, similar to Family Empowerment Scholarship students. Since these students are not included in our present enrollment forecast and are now eligible to receive these funds, it is possible the district will experience an increase in FTE. The legislature has set aside a new student reserve allocation for this purpose and also to offset unexpected growth in enrollment. Although the student reserve allocation is included in the total FEFP, it is not included in our per-student funding. Here are our property tax values since 2000. These dollars help fund both the operating and capital budgets for the coming school year. Last year, we had a 7.5% increase in taxable values. This year, our taxable values should increase by 2.5% based upon the estimated tax roll calculated by the Office of Economic and Demographic Research. The current projection, as you can see, is fairly steady growth of around 5% per year over the next 5 years. Given these uncertain times, the state legislature will allow districts to capture additional funding tied to the growth in taxable values by keeping the required local effort rate at the same level as last year. On slide number 10, this graph represents the total state appropriations, operating, and fixed capital outlay as a percentage of the total over the last 4 years. The first grouping, education, includes early learning, public schools, community colleges, and universities. As you can see, the percentage of the budget slightly increased from the prior year. It went from 28.5% of the budget to 28.6%. This graph includes all funds, including the infusion of federal funding. This next graph represents just the education appropriations as a percentage of the total over the last 4 years, and compares the 2021 first calculation to the 2022 first calculation. As you can see in the second grouping, less money has been appropriated to public schools. Here we have a comparison of funding per student over the last 15 years. This graph is based upon the second calculation for all years with the exception of July 2021, which is the conference report numbers. We won't have the second calculation until mid-July. We show you the funding per student back this far because it is prior to the Great Recession and also prior to the special millage. For the upcoming year, our regular per student funding is $18.97 above last year's amount shown in orange. This equates to a 0.24% increase in per student funding. Including our special millage shown in dark blue, our total funds per student increase. Even with the special millage, and including all the categoricals, you can see we still have a reduction in purchasing power of about $726 per student over the July 2007 amount. Without the voters of Orange County supporting the special millage, we would have to make significant reductions in services and programs in our district. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, or inflation factor being used is less than 2% on average over the 15 years. Other budget items on slide 13. Interest revenue has declined significantly, and there is no indication of an increase in interest rates at this time. The Family Empowerment Scholarship Program, or FES, continues to increase. The current year impact to OCPS was 3,323 scholarships going to private schools, resulting in a reduction to the district of $21.5 million. Student enrollment has projected Family Empowerment Scholarship enrollment of 3,997 for the coming year, with a projected impact to OCPS of $26.3 million. Although traditional face-to-face instruction will return next school year, there continues to be a demand for Orange County virtual school services. Currently, there are 2,483 full-time students enrolled, and resources will be shifted to OCVS as needed. Health insurance plan benefit changes will need to occur in order to keep our self-insured plan solvent. We continue to offer a zero-premium plan for employee-only coverage. For the current plan year, a $12.5 million loss is projected in the Employee Benefit Trust. Without changes to the plan, we will experience an additional $14.2 million loss for the 21-22 plan year. This will be discussed in more detail further this afternoon. We just received our most current state ranking for administrative cost per student. OCPS has the 11th lowest administrative cost per student out of the 67 school districts. No large school district is ranked higher than OCPS. We started the current year with an unassigned fund balance of $106 million. Board policy requires a minimum of 3% of unassigned fund balance for fiscal emergencies. As of the current year budget, that amounts to $53.4 million. This next chart on slide 16 provides some historical context to our unassigned fund balance. Again, these are dollars we have to help with fiscal emergencies. It is difficult to estimate where we will end the current year, as required accounting entries normally continue through the month of August. Some examples of items that impact this number include receipts of purchased items prior to July 1st, tax certificates sold by the tax collector, the infusion of federal funds, and utility consumption, to name a few. We anticipate our unassigned fund balance to be higher than previously projected due to the temporary infusion of federal dollars, along with the restricted timeline for the use of the funds. Food service meal prices will again remain the same as this past year. The Florida Department of Agriculture monitors district food service operations and requires various actions. This year, Food and Nutrition Services prepared and distributed more than 40 million meals to feed our students in school cafeterias or by using the grab-and-go strategy for those students in launch ed or virtual school. This was done at no charge to any student. The USDA has extended the waivers to allow our students to continue to receive breakfast, lunch, snacks, and supper at no charge for one more school year. The only other enterprise-like operation is our printing services area, which supports schools and work locations throughout the district. Future issues. We will continue our efforts to help our legislature understand the importance of adequately funding traditional public education. While our local citizens strongly support our schools, as evidenced by the overwhelming 84% support when renewing the special millage, the state continues its philosophy of shifting limited resources towards choice options. Currently, our special millage is expected to generate an estimated $164 million this next year, or around $805 per student. The special millage continues to be folded into your operating budget and accounts for 9% of recurring dollars to support our current level of operations. The last bullet comes directly from the special millage ballot language. And now I'll turn it over to Judith Padres, who will present the Capital Projects Fund.
This graph reflects our 5-year forecast of capital revenues. The light blue line for other state revenue shows our capital outlay and debt service, or CONDS, projected appropriation. These are generated from auto license fees and mostly used for safety purposes. We are anticipating to receive $8.7 million. The PICO line in burgundy shows the funding that we will receive from the state as pass-through for chartered capital. The estimated amount is $8.7 million. As a reminder, there are no guarantees that the legislature will continue to fully fund charter capital from PICO funds moving into the future. The gold bar represents our sales tax revenue projections. We're estimating $208 million for fiscal year 22. Just for reference, in FY19, we collected $275 million, and in FY20, with the last 4 months affected by COVID, we saw a revenue decline and ended up closing the year at $254 million. For this current year, fiscal year 21, we're projecting to collect about $200 million, and for fiscal year 22, we're anticipating revenues to continue to increase based on current collection trends. As we get closer to finalizing revenue collections for the fiscal year, we will revise projections to ensure they align with trends and we can continue to meet our funding allocations. The dark blue bar shows our impact fees. Impact fees are difficult to predict. We are anticipating to receive $50.9 million for fiscal year 22. The orange bar represents our 1.5 capital mill revenue projections. This is the equivalent of $247.5 million. On slide 21, this graph illustrates our proposed capital projects' use of funds for the upcoming year. Carry forward funds have not been incorporated into the budget. The largest portion of our budget is used for debt service and operations at 30.86%, followed by district-wide capital at 30.18%, which includes expenditures related to district-wide construction, functional equity, ancillary, painting, capital renewal, and site improvements. And the third largest use of funds is additional schools at 14.87%. The proposed capital plan reflects the following: funding for 23 relief schools, that is 13 elementary schools, 1 K-8, 5 middle schools, and 4 high schools. The opening year is based on recommendations received from the Advanced Planning Committee. Functional equity, these are projects primarily intended to add permanent instructional space and reduce some portable instructional spaces. There is also an allocation to a list of pre-2003 sales tax schools. These are the schools that never made it to the original sales tax list because of the recent construction work at that time. Funding is also included for repurposing schools, capital renewal. In accordance with the referendum, a portion of the sales tax revenues is transferred to the capital renewal fund to cover major system replacement needs. This plan continues to fund that transfer. Based on anticipated projects, we're projecting that the capital renewal fund will be fully committed by fiscal year 2029. Slide 23. These are our proposed 5-year new school openings. Our CIP is funding schools based on the opening year recommended by the Advanced Planning Committee. We have 3 new schools opening next month, following by 5 schools, 3 elementary schools, 1 K-8, and 1 middle school opening in August of 2022. In August of 2023, we're opening 1 middle school. In August of 2024, we're planning to open 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. The opening year for 3 of the sites included in this slide has changed from what is in the current FY21 adopted CIP. Site 129 is now replacing Site 45, and due to this new location, the Advanced Planning Committee recommended opening year is changing to accommodate the construction schedule. Site 118 is being proposed to open in 2024. This change in the opening year is due to limitations related to finding a site in the target zone. Also in this proposed plan, the opening year for Site 50 is changing to 2024 due to overcrowding and growth in the area. Again, the opening years in this proposed plan align with the Advanced Planning Committee's recommendations. Slide 25. These are comprehensive projects that are in construction. This slide only shows the projects that are moving into the construction phase this year: Orange Technical College at Orlando and Building 8 at Hungerford Elementary School. As you know, we have projects that are in their second year of construction that are not shown on this slide, such as Meadowwoods Middle School. Slide 26, these are the comprehensive projects that are entering design. The design of Orange Technical College at Mid-Florida, Westside, and Winter Park is projected to be completed in fiscal year 23. These are part of the final school projects from the original list of 136 sites. In addition, five pre-2003 sales tax projects will be moving into the design phase during fiscal year 22. Those are Colonial High School, Howard Middle School, Lakeview Middle School, 3 Points Elementary School, and Winter Park High School. On slide 27, our proposed CIP also includes funding for buses, which are on a 10-year replacement cycle, funding for portable moves and leasing, which is included to help manage population fluctuations. Of the 22.7 million, 11.5 million is allocated for leasing, and 11.2 million is for portable moves and installations. There is also funding included for charter schools, but again, this is just a flow-through from the state. There are dollars included in the plan for district-wide painting needs and for digital technology replacement, which addresses replacement of classroom technology and digital curriculum-related infrastructure. This concludes the capital portion of our budget presentation.
Now for our next steps. The tentative budget is based upon the second calculation that will be provided by the Department of Education around July 16th. Upon receipt, our budget team works long hours to finalize the document. Board members should receive a flash drive with all of the details of the budget by July 22nd. The budget advertisement will appear in the newspaper on July 25th, and then we will have the public hearing on July 27th. Key points to remember is that approval of the tentative millage rate and the total budget is what is required. As with most all budgets, adjustments can be made between tentative and the final adoption, as well as throughout the year. The public hearing for the adopted budget is September 14th. And now, Superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Conkerline and Ms. Padres. Certainly extensive information provided to the board. No action required from you at this point, but happy to certainly answer any questions you might have and listen to any discussion. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions I have. I know we're comparing our base student allocation and our FEFP to last year, but considering the fact that last year we received a hold harmless allocation based on students that some of which didn't materialize, for me, it would be very helpful if we could compare the fiscal year 20 to the fiscal year 22. The data we have is helpful, but it would be more meaningful to me if I could see the same data that was presented in this presentation, but compared against 2020. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the second question I have on the capital renewal fund, what is the percent that we're transferring out of the sales tax at this point to the capital renewal fund?
It's based on a formula. It's 2.4% of the cumulative capital expenses, and
Okay.
and it builds year after year.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, we're looking at our capital expenses and we're using 2.4% of our capital expenses to go into our capital renewal fund.
That is correct. We're looking at the
Okay.
capital expenses, I'm sorry, in capital funds only.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's helpful. That's all I had. And excellent presentation. I should have mentioned also earlier on the legislative as well as the budget. And I also want to mention it's really helpful for me to have the notes that are in here as a visual learner. It was extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Member Gallo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I concur with Chair Jacobs. Having this, like with the words and be able to follow on highlight was extremely helpful. So I truly appreciate that. I do have a couple of questions, and I need to circle back to the class size amendment because I'm still a little confused. So the calculation that the state did in the reduction for class size amendment, it was based on current state law, right? It wasn't based on the districts that are school choice districts. Is that an accurate assumption? So when they reduced it by 10%, they reduced it based on enrollment, and that enrollment met current state law that's in statute.
I'm sorry, I'm
Go
gotten a
ahead.
little confused here.
Can you pose the question
Yeah,
again,
can you
please?
pose that again?
So there was a 9.7% reduction in the class size, dollars from the state in the FEFP. That 10% reduction was based on the current law that's in statute. So they looked at enrollment, they looked at the current law that's in statute, and then they determined to reduce it by 10%. But that didn't take into consideration those districts that are school choice districts. Am I correct?
I would have to get back to you on that one.
I think the answer is yes, we'll confirm.
Okay. And the reason that I'm asking this is I'm trying to determine the $25 million reduction that we have in the budget. Since we're a choice district, theoretically, in my mind, we wouldn't have been hit as hard as some districts that aren't school choice districts. So since we can do a school-wide average, we shouldn't have been impacted as much by that 9.7% reduction than other school districts. And I'm trying to find out if that 25 million is based on the numbers from the state and we kind of just took our number off the top, or did we actually look at our numbers based on being a school district and amend accordingly or adjust accordingly? That's my question. I'm trying to figure out if that 25.5 is really an accurate number or is it an inflated number?
Our 25.5 number is accurate.
Okay, so it would be based on our projected enrollment and the fact that we are a choice district and we can class size average at the school level.
I don't believe that we're a choice district impacts the reduction that we received from the state. But let me clarify that for you.
Okay, because and so maybe my mind's not, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but since we're a choice district and we do get it classified as an average, we would need less employees in our school because we average at the school versus the class. And if you're at a class and you're over 1 or 2 students, you have to replace that teacher. Since we don't, it's reasonable to expect that we would use less dollars.
Pardon me, I'm Rick Collins.
Hi.
When they just reduced the rate for K-3. There was no correlation between what the cost was here in our district versus another district. It was just an across-the-board reduction in the rate for K-3, the K-3 category. So they were targeting a certain dollar amount to reduce class size, and they just picked one category and just reduced it. 4 to 8 and 9 to 12 actually went up. So it was just sort of an arbitrary reduction in funding, in the funding rate in order to save a certain amount of money by the legislature. They did not look at the district to see whether they were a choice district or not. They just did it across the
It was a
board for all
flat.
districts.
So and you brought up my next question, so thank you very much. So we reduced our K through 2 reduced by what? I could look at the amount, the $300, $315 was it? $317, but we got an increase of $52 from 4 through 12. We have way more students in 4 through 12 than we do in pre-K through 3. So can you explain to me how we're still at a net loss? Even though we had an increase in 4 through 12 of 52, a reduction in K through 3 of 317, like, it seems like with the majority of our students are in 4 through 12, those numbers should have equaled or been more, not been a deficit in those dollars.
Well, two things happened. The funding for last year for the fourth calculation was actually based on the original forecast of students of 209,000 students. So you had two things happening when they went to the first calculation. They actually went from the 209,000 students that they were using in 21 to the 204,000 students for 22. So that was part of the adjustment, was the reduction in the number of students in the calculation. And then the second change was the change in rates, a decrease in K3 and an increase in 4-8 and 9-12. So there were multiple things changing at the same time, and it all netted out to the $25 million.
Okay, so that includes the decline in enrollment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense, and I know my time's up, so I'll circle back. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Collins, it's nice to see you.
So Madam Chair, I was waiting to commend him for consulting with us until the end. Now that he's been called upon, let me remind folks, Rick Collins was our former CFO, and actually, since Dale Collins only recently retired, he was also, did I say Dale Collins? Dale Kelly. He was also Dale Kelly's mentor, and so we appreciate him. Now that he actually had to come to the mic, I'll have to actually pay him for consulting. But we are very pleased to have his expertise here to help shore up and support our finance department.
Yes, and I had the privilege of working with Mr. Collins before he retired, and it's wonderful to have you back in this role while we get through this transition, so welcome back. I'm actually up next, and I think we started on we're probably going to need Mr. Collins one more time, because when we look at the slides on face value, it's a little confusing until we kind of go into this deep dive, and I want to make sure that we are crystal clear with our parents. So we were talking about the reduction in the FEP and then the increase of the $52. And then when you get to the graph slide, there's a $19 difference on, our multicolored graph that shows our millage rate. So I would like you to just explain one more time what dollars are really truly are the differential or that variance, and where we net per student, and then what, if any, dollars are flexible, which is the back half of our discussion here. Would we have to offset raises or do anything like that? So I'm just trying to get to that succinct answer, because it's become so complicated with, I think our projections are going to beat those 4,000. I think I have 4,000 new neighbors alone. Never mind the rest of the county. But, we just need that clarity on exactly where we are per student, and then what dollars in that little minuscule bar are flexible.
So I think you were originally referring to slide number 12. Am I correct there?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
No?
Perhaps. Perhaps. Let me get to it, and I'll tell you if it was 12. It probably is 12, because it's the graph we use every single time that shows the local contribution. Yes, it is. It's slide 12. Thank you.
Correct. And this is our comparison to the second calculation of the prior year, which was when we were operating under the assumption of the hold harmless. We had not received a proration yet. And based on that, we are showing, we are being funded $18.97 more than the second calculation of the prior year.
So how will that adjust? Do we know that yet? So you're saying it was based on the second calculation? So, say it again. Sorry.
It's actually a difficult,
Yeah.
a difficult
and I
concept
use this
this year.
chart all the time in the community. That's why I want it to be crystal clear.
So our funding, if we compare to the second calculation of the prior year, which is what our budget is historically
Which
built
is the
on.
February-ish timeframe.
No, the second
The
calculation
October.
is July.
Oh, the
July to
July.
July to
Okay.
July, with the exception of this current year where we've got the conference report numbers right now.
Okay.
But when we compare back to prior year July, there's an $18.97 per student funding increase, or less than 0.25%.
Okay, thank you. That helped. I'm happy, this is more of a comment, that there is more money invested in early learning, because I think that will help us. It didn't mean it should come out of what we're trying to do, because we still have people or children behind, so that didn't help there, but I'm happy about that. The FRS increase, where are those dollars going, that $8+ million? What are they being used for, that FRS increase? Does that go to?
That's the portion that the district is required to send to the state.
For each person, for a fee? Does any of that benefit, or what I'm trying to get to is, what portion of that actually benefits our employees? Even though it's an increase for us, does that help in their retirement funds? Those kind of things, because I think that's a value add if it does, or is it a fee?
No fee. All of it goes into the Florida retirement pension.
Okay, so that, well, it's a burden that takes away from immediate dollars. There could be some future benefit for our employees who get those dollars. Okay. You were talking about the analysis on the half-penny sales tax. When was that analysis taken, and has that been redone since we've really opened back up the state? I'm just trying to get a sense of the timing on that projection on those dollars, because when I'm talking to the hospitality industry, they're telling me they may beat 2019 numbers now in some hotels and things. I don't know how that floats out the entire sector, but.
So for the current year, for fiscal year 21, what we do is we look at month-to-month collections for the current year, and we build upon them. So the earlier months of the fiscal year were a lot lower than what we're showing now. So month after month, the trend continues to get better in a way. And then for the following year, what we're doing for fiscal year 22, we're just building upon what we're projecting for this year. And as we get closer to closing the fiscal year, we will revise those estimates, because we want to align them with the current collections.
Well, thank you. That's kind of still retrospective instead of forward projections. Is there a way, and I'm not asking you to change your model here, but maybe have a parallel model of talking to our partners in hospitality? Because let's face it, that's where the biggest swing is in our sales tax, is the tourists help us a great deal. And look at their reservation projections and look at what's going on with conventions, just to see how well the real time and the forecast look, because those, that really affects that capital schedule. And I'm happy to see other areas catching up with the west side, but the west side still is not done, and there's not enough schools in that schedule right now. So we, if we can maybe do a parallel look at what is trending in future reservations and the convention businesses being rebooked and all of those things, and just maybe see how it's doing, do a little bit more forecasting. Thank you, and my time is up. Member Castro Dental.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions. One is about debt service. We have a debt service of 30.86%, and I don't really have anything to compare that to. Is that it's on slide 21 is where I saw that, the pie chart. Is that comparable to other school districts or state agencies that having a debt service of 30.86%?
That number is actually debt service and operations. So we have in that 30.86%, we have the 88.5 million debt service allocation, as well as a transfer out from sales tax to capital renewal. So it was the 2.4% transfer that I was explaining earlier. And I believe we have also a portable leasing transfer. So it's not just it isn't just debt service. It includes other categories.
So when you look at just the debt service, do we know about how much that represents? If you were to take out the operations?
I can calculate it for you, but
Later?
yes.
Okay, and then is that comparable to other
then the
school
comparison.
districts, the amount? I have a question about FRS as well, following Member Gould's question. Our contribution that our district pays, I believe, is a result of the state not paying additional money for the FRS. Is that correct? We're paying more because they're paying less?
I don't believe it's that they're paying less. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. The state legislature establishes what the rate will be for all FRS participants. And so you have to contribute that rate in order to participate in the FRS plan. So that rate would be applicable to all statewide participants. So it would be consistent. They would pay that rate as well for state employees as well. So it's consistent across the board. Yeah, the state legislature could pick up a portion of the increase if they wanted to, but they basically just established the rate and then spread it out among all the FRS participants.
Okay, so they essentially are shifting the burden back to us, I guess.
Well, they're trying to make sure that the FRS plan remains solvent and stable. And so they have an actuarial analysis that determines what that rate has to be in order to maintain the level of benefits for the participants. And so that's basically how it's established.
Okay, thank you. The unassigned fund balance, let me see where that. Not sure where that's it. Yeah, number 16. How did we use the unassigned fund balance last year when we were having to deal with our unexpected COVID crisis?
Initially, we were using unassigned fund balance to offset the cost for PPE and such for those first months, cleaning supplies, masks, et cetera. If you're talking specifically for last year, yes.
Yes. Okay, so then now that we have this influx of the federal funding to kind of help us avoid those fiscal emergencies or additional costs, we have more in our unassigned balance than last year or the year before. So we have a little bit more flexibility in those unassigned fund balance this year. Okay. I think I had one more question, but I didn't write it down. So I cannot rely on my memory, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just as a point of clarity, in case there might be those listening, so your unassigned fund balance, remember, is like your savings account for emergencies. By policy, you have to hold aside a certain amount, and then other portions that are available, you could use for other things that are non-recurring in nature. So I want to make sure we specified that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have just, I think, 2 or 3 more questions. On the House Bill 745 that passed, that switched around the funding structure for really all of the McKay Gardner and Family Empowerment Scholarships. On slide 8, you talked about, can you just explain that a little bit more about how it's going to change our enrollment and could bring the district additional funds? Could you just kind of explain to me how it would provide additional funds for the district?
So to follow up with Scott's explanation before, these dollars were set aside so for we believe two purposes. One is the Gardner Scholarship, which is now going to be folded into the FEFP. We don't know what Gardner Scholarship students are residing in Orange County. So when we learn that information and it begins to flow through our budget, similar to FES, we have to receive the funding for those students, should there be any in Orange County.
But it would just truly be a pass-through, correct?
Correct.
It would be a pass-through, okay. That answers that question. And then on slide 13, you talked about the Family Empowerment Scholarship Program, and the current year we had 3,323 scholarships, and we're projecting an enrollment of 3,997. So does that 997, is that just the increase over the 3,323, or are we expecting a 3,997 additional students to go into the family empowerment?
No,
scholarship?
I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
I think it was. I was just,
yeah.
okay, so it was just an increase.
Correct.
Okay. And then with the Gardner, it's my understanding, and I don't know that this is the appropriate place to ask, and I can get with staff offline if it's not, but it's my understanding that with the Gardner Scholarship, there's some rules with that Gardner's that will require IEPs for the student, which means we could have an influx of students coming back to public schools that currently aren't in public schools to obtain that IEP.
Member Gallo, that is correct. There remains some lack of clarity around that, but we certainly have staff on top of it. We've not received specific direction.
Okay.
But the potential, you're exactly right.
All right, thank you. And then my last question, and I know I'm being a little hard-headed about this class size enrollment, but on page 7, it stated that there is a projected growth in students with a reduction of funding of $289 per student. And then it goes on to say it's attributed to the significant increase in class size funding. So I'm still, does that 289 reductions include decline enrollment plus the decline in class size funds? So it's still those two things, but then it says, even though we're going to get more students, so if we're going to get more students, how can it be also include declining enrollment? So I'm just a little confused.
So I'm going to try to say it in non-financial
Okay,
terms.
thank you.
It might be helpful. So what you have to remember is our dollars per student were inflated last year because of the hold harmless. So your dollars per student was larger last year because the state didn't take away what they should have taken away. So that inflated. So when you look at the difference there, it's what we're seeing.
So
Once
these are
they right
actuals
sizes.
versus, okay.
Yeah.
Now
All
I
right.
got it. Now I understand. Thank you so much. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you for this report.
Member Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, let's see. My first question is from page 5. You say that the teacher salary categorical funding is 3.2 million.
That's the incremental increase.
The incremental increase, okay. That increase was given to help districts bring their minimum salary up to the 47.5, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we've already done that in Orange County.
Correct.
So, are there any directions on what districts, like, last year they were very strict about how to spend all that. So are there any direction, have they given any direction yet as to if you already are at the 47.5, what has to be done with that funding?
If we are already at the 47.5, I believe then the entire incremental increase can then be bargained, negotiated.
So let me clarify. You're still back under the old rules of where your highly effective has to receive 50% more than those that are not highly effective. The ratios come back into play like we had the previous year. So it's not as simple as the dollars can now be collectively bargained.
Right.
However you distribute it, they have to meet those old rules. Forgive me for
Right.
not quoting them exactly. 75%, 50% more for the highly effective versus this group and that group. All of that is back in play now. And so our CBLT and under Jim Preuser and our finance team have to do those calculations once we know how many teachers are highly effective. Then you got to calculate their percentage versus those who are not highly effective. All of that calculation that was driving everyone crazy is now back in play.
Okay, and this is kind of a little off topic from budget, but do we know how those are going to be calculated and figured out with the testing? Did they make any accommodations for that with the testing this year? I know that they did for school grades. So, you know what I'm asking, because
Yeah, no specific accommodations were made. So we're in the midst of those discussions. We'll have to have those discussions, but there've been no accommodation by the state.
okay. On page 12, the July 2021 numbers you said that right now you're using the conference report. Can you explain what that is? What is the conference report?
The conference report is actually the first calculation.
Oh, okay, the first calculation. So, and you said we should be getting the second one in
July,
okay. And
which is then what your tentative budget is built on.
okay. And we have an idea of, it's really hard to say though, isn't it? To project what we're going to be enrolling. I mean, I know that a lot of families are still waiting to hear about, policies. Some policies for next year. So I'm assuming it's going to be very difficult to tell exactly what that enrollment or project. I mean, we might be really surprised either way, I would think.
Correct, and then there is that student reserve allocation, although primarily for the Gardner Scholarship, I guess depending on how it all flows out, some of those dollars will likely go back to districts that have experienced growth, assuming there are funds available.
Okay. Okay. I have a quick question about the unassigned fund balance on page 16. I noticed on year 2018, the reserves went down considerably. What did we use those funds for? Do you recall, or does anyone recall?
That 18.
From 17, 18?
I'll have to get back to you. I don't want to misquote.
Okay. And I would just, reiterate, I think what Member Castor Gentle said, that that is used for fiscal emergencies, but, we are going to have a influx of federal funding for fiscal emergencies related to COVID. So, I think that's important to keep in mind. And I had one more question, but now I don't see it. So I think that's it for me for now. Thank you.
I circled back. I had two things. One is, how have we, in the capital side, kind of calculated in cost or of material and lack of supply chain? I know that's beginning to move, but has that been factored in at all in our cost analysis?
There is an escalation factor included in project estimates. I would have to get back to you
Okay.
in terms of what percentage it is, because I believe it changes. It may not be all 5% or 6% throughout the plan. But
That's
I'll-
great. I would like to see that because I'm hoping that as everybody finds their cargo ships and things and the trade embargoes lift a little bit, that we get more supplies and that cost comes down at least, or balances out over a period of time, because it's been completely unpredictable, I know, right now. My last is more of a comment, and once again, I feel challenged by the disconnect between our legislature and what's going on, particularly in high-growth communities. Orange County has gone in a 2-year period from needing a minimum hourly wage of $15 an hour to $17 an hour just to have a shelter in this county. We have employees that are making far under $13 an hour, so they're not even making market rate. And it is concerning that that we do not have people's backs and the ability to garner enough dollars just to pay market for many employees. Because when I'm looking at the dollars that we have just to get those minimums up, never mind the compression rate that we're going to probably discuss at the end of this, I'm wholeheartedly agree that we needed to raise minimum salaries of teachers, but now what do we do about our master's level teachers? What do we do about those exceptional folks that should be getting much more, and those that have shown tremendous progress in untenable situations? They just don't have the backs of our teachers and our employees. And I just feel very disappointed in a year where we have been offered a lot of support from our community, but also from between the federal budget, and that so much went into reserve when they could have reinvested with the growth rate in the state, which doubled during the pandemic. It's a little disheartening, but it's more commentary than questions, so I will stop. Member Castor-Dental.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate your comments. That might be something that we put on our legislative agenda going forward to help educate not just our local delegation, but all those who are on those education committees and other ones that are relevant. I think that's very important. If they don't hear from us, they don't know, and they can feign ignorance. So my question is about the governor's $1,000 teacher and principal bonuses. Are those coming out of our dollars, or are those outside of any of this discussion of funds in the district?
That is outside of this discussion. The governor is paying that with his portion of the ARP funds.
Okay, so if the governor has the ability to be flexible with those dollars, does that give us the same ability to be flexible with our federal funds as well?
So there's not a yes or no question. ESSER $1 had certain guidelines in place. ESSER 2 had different guidelines in place. We still wait for direction on the ESSER $3. You'll hear some talk about those large sums that are coming in, but the rules change based on which segment, and the time by which you must expend those dollars changes depending on which segment as well. I do think we'll have some ability. I do think it's important to note you can't do raises out of non-recurring dollars because that's a recurring cost. But we believe we'll have some flexibility when it comes to other means of trying to compensate our employees.
Thank you. And then when you say that when we get direction, is that direction from the federal government for those dollars or the state or both?
The state is supposed to be providing further clarity on the last section, the ESSER $3 we're still waiting for.
And then do all those decisions need to be bargained or?
No, no,
Okay.
it is not bargainable. You have to meet certain criteria. I have to sign saying we're going to follow the rules for those federal dollars, and then they are not collectively bargained. What we are expected to do is get input from various stakeholders in the community, which we've done in the past. Our principals have gotten input from our teachers. Ms. Dormal has provided feedback on where those dollars would be useful as well, but it is not collectively bargained.
And from the members of OESPA as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. Both unions have provided feedback.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have a real quick question, just for my own clarity. Can you just tell us when, there's 5 or 6 calculations? Can you just tell us when those happen during the year?
So the first calculation is now, second calculation is July, third calculation we typically get following the results of your October survey 2. So that we typically get around January. And then the fourth calculation, April, May.
And how many surveys are there? Because I think I sometimes get the surveys confused with the calculations.
There are 5 surveys.
5 surveys. And those are like our 10-day count, our October count, and then our February count and our end-of-year count.
Correct.
Okay. We don't have a December count, a December survey.
No, surveys don't, no, there's no
Okay.
December survey, but I can get you specifically the surveys and the criteria for each.
That'd be great. Just so I had a cheat sheet because I confused them. So thank you.
I remember what my last comment was. It was just to agree with Member Gould on the forecasting of the capital, the sales tax revenues, just because I agree with her from what I hear when I speak to, you know, restaurateurs and hoteliers, that they're seeing a lot, quite a boom. So I agree with that. I just wanted to make one more comment and agree with what Member Gould was saying. I'm again very disheartened, as she is, that the state, you know, that again, there's just such a disconnect with what our employees need and what we need to help our employees, and what they're providing. It's just the priorities are just so out of whack, it seems, especially when, as she said, you know, the federal government is so is being so positive and investing so much. It's very frustrating from the state point of view. I think that I agree with her about so many of our classified employees are making less than what they need to make to be able to live in this town. It's a huge problem, and I think that it's one that we really have to share with them, express with them, as Dr. Hester Dental said, make that more clear than we already have, continue to keep making that clear. And then on our side, I think that, you know, we can say, this is what we have, and this is, you know, we're not getting much more, this is what we have. And I know that we've done this before, but I really think we have to look again at if this is what we have to prioritize the employees as best we can. What they have been through this year was just unreal and so taxing on them. And I've talked to teachers and employees that just are exhausted. And when we talk about student learning gains and we talk about, you know, student mental health and creating positive environments, that comes from having positive and healthy employees. And we can't have healthy and positive employees if they don't feel appreciated and they don't feel like they are being paid what they deserve for the work that they put in. And the work that they had to put in, the extra hours and hours of work they had to do this year. And all of them, from the food service to the bus drivers to the teachers, it was just, and the administrators, it was just hours and hours of extra work. And I think that it has to be a priority to figure out a way that we can make them feel that they are getting what they deserve, or they're getting at least a little bit of appreciation or something, or some way to make them feel compensated. So I wanted to say that. And also, I did also just want to say a quick word about our playground covers. I know that it's not a huge priority, but for our little babies that have to get on those slides that are 150 degrees on their skin, it is a priority to them. So we've done such a great job with the tot lat shades, and some of our schools have figured out ways to raise money within their school, within their PTA, but a lot of our schools have not. And so if we can still look at that somehow, I don't know with what or how, but that's still a priority to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Chair Jacobs.
Thank you. Wanted to just kind of weigh in on a couple of things as I've been listening to this conversation. First, Member Gallo, I agree with you on having a schedule, just a cheat sheet in front of us, because like you, I sometimes get the calculations versus the enrollment calculations that we do confused. So that would be very helpful. There was just a brief discussion about the FRS, and I did want to just chime in on that so there wouldn't be any confusion with our employees, that even though we have to pay more in, it doesn't mean they'll get more out. The amount that they receive in retirement benefits is a fixed schedule, and it's separate from what we pay in. But what continues to happen is the state, whoever is doing the calculation for them, undercalculates what needs to be paid in, and so it seems that each year it keeps increasing, and it's something that it's hard for us to predict. So it's definitely a drain on the resources we would otherwise be able to put into the classroom, but the end result will not be an increase to employees. Just wanted to, in case anybody was listening, make sure there wasn't any confusion about that. I know I get emails from time to time from employees about that same issue. I also, Vice Chair Gould, your comments about cost of living increases and the disconnect, I completely agree with you, as does Member Byrd, and I'm sure the rest of the board. I'm wondering if it might be possible, Dr. Jenkins, for us to explore there's a couple things I think would be helpful in terms of information, and perhaps a study of the competitive nature of our wages in this region would be helpful. The cost of living plus the competitive nature of, or lack thereof, of our wages for some beyond teachers, for our classified employees. But I think if we have that information, that would be helpful in making our case that we have to be able to continue to hire the people that we need to help our students get to school, to keep our schools clean and safe, to provide food and nutrition services. But at the same time, I know there's always the pushback from the legislature, not from our delegation, but from others, that we have the money, we're just not using it correctly. So if we knew whether our wages are in line with other districts across the state, that would also be helpful to know if we're allocating. I know For instance, the data came out and was in this presentation that we remain the 11th lowest district in terms of overall administrative cost. Not total cost, but percentage wise, that's a very positive thing. And we are, as I understand, the lowest in terms of large urban districts. So that in and of itself, to me, answers a lot of the questions of, are we efficiently using our dollars to get them into the classroom and to our students? But still, if there were a way that we could compare ourselves from a salary standpoint to other districts, that might be a helpful piece of information as we look towards next year for how do we better communicate our message, not just to the legislature, but to our local communities, so that we can get more advocates on board with this, with factual information. Certainly, the private sector is struggling right now. Hotels are struggling, restaurants are struggling. Pretty much everybody is struggling to get employees. Some of that is due to the stimulus money. And we're seeing wage adjustments in the private sector that is going to make it even harder for us to get the employees and to employ and retain those employees. And the second half of that, it's not just about us retaining the employees, it's about those employees being able to afford to live here in our community and enjoy their quality of life here. So I totally agree with all of that. I just would like maybe to explore ways, maybe using Sean Snaith with the Institute of Economic Competitiveness might be an avenue to go to avoid having.
Talking about the millage, because it's very important. We cannot lose that, and we are very appreciative of our constituents, but we have to let them know that we depend on that to have more initiatives and programs in arts and sports and everything like that. So I think that it is very important that our community know about that and keep talking about that, educating them, and just being a voice for the special millage.
Thank you, Member Felder. Yeah, I don't know that any of our frontline classified or even our teachers thought they would be considered first responders before COVID hit, and certainly they are. Member Colbert? Thought I heard a beep.
Yes, Madam Chair, can
Yay!
First, I'll apologize. We lost connectivity for about 5 minutes, so I missed some of the discussion. So I'll be brief. Somehow, Chair Jacobs must have been looking over my notes remotely because she made a lot of the comments that I wanted to make. So I'll just reiterate, I am in complete agreement with the board discussion that while there are a lot of priorities we would like to have, given the financial landscape, our number one priority has got to be to take care of our people. So while there may be a disconnect from the state level on that, I want to make it very clear to the public and to our people that collectively as a board and a district, our local priorities are in order. It is going to be very challenging for us to compete for employees with the private sector, particularly those important employees who work on our custodial crew, our food service, our bus drivers, giving them a living wage, paying them what they're worth, and competing with the private sector. So I'll limit my comments because other board members have asked the questions that I have had. I appreciate that. And just one request, there were a few unanswered questions where staff needs to get back to the board. If you would just ensure that those questions are answered and sent to the board in its entirety, because I think we're thinking along the same lines here. So thank you to my fellow board members and to district staff for your presentations today.
Thank you, Member Colbert, and the superintendent gave thumbs up on making sure that we all got the information, so that will happen. Any other comments or discussions on the budget? If not, we'll move on to our ESSER presentation.
Madam Chair, members of the board, as promised, we want to bring you another update on ESSER funding. Keep in mind, all of our ESSER plans and funding is somewhat fluid at this point, but we want to keep you updated on where those expenditures are currently planned to land. There's been no additional report or plan submitted to the states since our May 4th, I believe, was when we had our preliminary for ESSER 1. There's been no additional submission to the state, but we wanted to bring you up to date. So Chief Academic Officer Kathy Schuler and Kim Gilbert will walk us through.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Chair Jacobs, Vice Chair Gould, board members, and Superintendent Jenkins. The ESSER funds are intended to help states and school districts safely reopen schools, measure and effectively address significant learning loss, and take other actions to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on students and families who depend on our K through 12 schools. Nationally, for ESSER 1, funds included approximately $13 billion. ESSER 2 funds included approximately $54 billion, and ESSER 3 around $123 billion. OCPS received $55,446,694 from ESSER 1. For ESSER 2, OCPS will receive a total of $244,651,865. For ESSER 3, the initial estimation was around $561,644,000. However, the most recent information from FDOE indicates that we will receive slightly less at $557,405,320. The national data includes charter schools for all ESSER categories and private schools for ESSER 1. In researching areas of priority for the expenditures of funds, we collected input from multiple stakeholders centered on three major themes: high-quality instruction, narrowing the achievement gap, and social and emotional learning, which directly correlates to our 2025 strategic plan and the research around educational recovery and renewal strategies. Since we last met, and as mentioned previously at our last meeting, the team created a dashboard which will be accessible for public view. This afternoon, we will walk you through each section of the ESSER Accountability Dashboard, starting from left to right. The dashboard elements were derived from the Council of Great City Schools and Chiefs for Change. It is important to note, past figures are updated and continue to change. For example, initially all of ESSER 2 funds were to be spent by September 2022 as outlined by the Florida Department of Education. However, this was later changed, which required OCPS to spend approximately 50% of the ESSER 2 allocation by August 31st, 2021. The first section of the dashboard, and I'm on slide 5, illustrates a snapshot of the total funds expended and total funds allocated. There is approximately $8 million available to expend from ESSER 1. For ESSER 2 and 3, the total allocation is indicated on the slide. However, plans for expenditures of the allocation are yet to be completely finalized. Once plans are solidified, the dashboard will update dynamically. ESSER 3 funds will become available later this summer. This section outlines the total expenditures from ESSER 1 over the past year, connected to each initiative. As the dashboard updates, this will show funding by each of the ESSER funds that have been expended over 5 years. For example, a loss of learning ties back to narrowing the achievement gap and includes tutoring, both face-to-face and virtual, intervention resources in reading and math for K through 12 students, student devices to accelerate the one-to-one initiative for cohort 8 and avoid a loss of learning due to the pandemic, iPads for ESE students, and over 6,000 swivel cameras were purchased for teachers. High-quality education included support for ESE students and families, such as contracted evaluations for IEP meetings, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, and transportation for ACT/SAT testing. Health and safety encompasses substitute teacher coverage due to COVID-19, personal protective equipment for visual performing arts students, nursing services and all school clinics, COVID-19 testing for athletics, and additional custodial costs. Other expenditures includes athletic support and allocations to charter and private schools. Employee retention includes staff from March through May of 2020. This section also updates as activities occur. I'm on slide 7. This area of the dashboard is a sample of the total expended funds by goals directly and indirectly aligned to the strategic plan. For example, we purchase intervention materials, which aligns to learning loss, which supports the strategic plan of narrowing the achievement gap. Although some expenditures could fall into multiple areas correlated to the strategic plan, we only selected a key performance indicator, strategy, or goal. This chart represents the total funds encumbered by school year. This section will update as expenditures occur. Currently, this section only exemplifies ESSER 1 funding. And now to Mrs. Gilbert.
Coming soon, as required by the American Rescue Plan. Thank you. Better. Coming soon, as required by the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, ESSER 2 and 3 will require districts to spend 20% of their allocation towards a loss of learning. In the future, this portion of the dashboard will reflect these expenditures. Slide 10. On the revenue by source portion of the dashboard, you will find the projected allocations. The largest allocation of funds, ESSER 3 at 65%. ESSER 3 funds will be available later in the school year. Please note that ESSER 2 will be expended over 2 timeframes. The first district portion, $104,333,615, has to be expended by September 1st of 2021. The remainder of the ESSER 2 funds have to be expended by September of 22. The bar graph featured illustrates revenue by year based on the projected allocations for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. There is an overlap of expenditures by fiscal year. Slide 12. The pie chart provides a view of the percentage of priority expenditures by category. Currently, this reflects actual expenditures for ESSER 1 for the 2021 school year. This chart will update dynamically as expenses occur. This is a list of individual items that fall under the goals that directly and indirectly tied to the strategic plan as indicated on the aforementioned slide number 7. ESSER 1 spend as of June 2021 are transportation for ACT/SAT testing, athletic support, cohort 8 devices, custodial labor and supplies, distance learning, emergency FMLA, ESE supports, intervention resources for reading and math, staff retention, COVID-19 related substitutes, swivels, tutoring, nursing services, personal protective equipment for visual performing arts. Inclusive of these costs are charter and private schools and indirect costs. So the total expenditures for ESSER 1 as of June 2021 is $46,469,218. The state has provided approximately 50% of ESSER 2 funds in advance that must be spent by September of '21. Some of the funding we are planning are the following: math interventions, summer school staff, SROs, and transportation to address the loss of learning, additional teacher allocations, K-2 interventions, extended summer employment, replacement of digital devices, additional middle school social workers, K-8 guidance counselors, nursing services, summer PD, resources for ESE and ELL students, and digital device repair. Additional initiatives we are planning to connect with ESSER 2 funding include COVID-19 claims, COVID-related substitutes, HVAC filters, water filling stations, increase in dual enrollment costs due to COVID-19, SEL, staff allocations, custodial services, writing teams, and instructional resources. The remainder of the ESSER 2 funds will be available in July of 2021, and currently the district is in the planning phase for these funds.
Thank you. Now back to you, Superintendent Jenkins, for questions, comments, and discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Happy to answer any questions. We will bring you regular updates, and so excited about our dashboard that will be available to the entire community to check on us anytime regarding those federal dollars. Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
I had pushed my button. I'm happy to see that we have used and will continue to use to supplement and help with staff allocations and teacher allocations, well, staff across the board. Question, the nursing services, how is that money being utilized? Because I know I am seeing a change in nursing status in my district from utilization of RNs because the schools had been raising that supplemental dollars, didn't have that ability this past year, down to LPNs or certified nurses, which are not adequate. And then my second thing will be about telehealth, but if I could get an answer on the nurses.
Certainly, Member Gould, we are contracting out for nursing services with the party that provides both RNs and LPNs for our schools based on the need. RNs are usually in schools where there are specific needs due to units that reside in those schools. And then in instances where we have LPNs, we have some also contracted RNs who will circulate among those schools to check in on those LPNs as well.
So will the minimum now be LPNs in every school?
That is the intention, LPN in every
I'm
school.
smiling under here, even though it's not only a half smile, because you know I want RNs in every school.
I know you're smiling, Member Gould, and that's why I want to bring that smile down a little bit, because I want to be very clear. ESSER dollars run through 23.
Understood.
At that point, if the board wanted to continue that level of health professionals in our schools, there would need to be some additional dollars. But we are very pleased to have that offered at this point, and I knew you would be pleased.
Yes, I am. I'm not thrilled, but I'm pleased, because I really want RNs in every school.
We'll take it.
But telehealth, too. I would suggest that we take a look at equipping each of our clinics and maybe even another safe space within the schools with the telehealth capability, not only for physical health concerns that may be beyond the nurse, but for mental health especially, that would allow that connectivity and really try to look at some research about safe space and how, training guidance counselors, mental health professionals, the school nurses, any of those kind of go-to adults could get somebody into that space and connect.
You'd be happy to know we did pilot some telehealth in some of our clinics, looking to expand that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to echo your sentiment about telehealth. It's wonderful to hear that we are piloting those in schools, but as we move forward and we continue to innovate, you know, telehealth, it was included in the Baker Act bill, so we're allowed to use that for de-escalation of our students in crisis, which would only further prevent us to unnecessary Baker Act. But even more than that, you know, if we can keep teachers and students in schools, then we will have better outcomes for our students. So we all recognize that attendance is extremely important, and I would guess, because I don't know, but the number one reason for those to be out, teachers or students, is because they have to go to the doctor, or the teacher's taking their student to their child to the doctor, or they're going to the doctor. So yeah, anything that we can do to prevent the loss of instruction, especially, you know, post-pandemic, I think is extremely important. So that's wonderful to hear. The question I have is about social emotional learning, and I'm only asking this because I know that I'm a bit confused, so I figured if I'm a tad bit confused, maybe others are as well. But during the State Board of Education meeting last week, it was brought to light that there was a memo that went out to all the mathematic instruction material bidder, whoever's going to bid on the mathematic instruction. And it basically says that the inclusion of social emotional learning must not be embedded in our mathematics curriculum, because it's not part of the new best standards. So I guess my question is will that hinder anything within our school board, within Orange County, or stop us or prevent us in any way from making sure that we do what's best for our children, and that should include social emotional learning?
I am so glad you brought that up. I'm going to ask Dr. Schuler to comment as well. Let me reassure both this board and our parents. Social emotional learning is foundational in our classrooms. It doesn't have to be a separate part of the curriculum. If a teacher is familiar with social emotional learning and its principles, it's embedded throughout the day. Does not need to be a part of a particular curriculum. I found it unusual that there would be, someone would feel it necessary to specifically state that for the mathematics curriculum, but so be it.
Yep.
Our training for social emotional learning with our teachers is really about embedding it throughout the day and not in a particular curriculum. Dr. Schuler, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I'm pleased to announce that we are looking at, through the use of ESSER 2 funding, purchasing SEL resources for all of our schools, centralized SEL resources. That came up when we gathered input from our stakeholders that was actually a need. So we're pleased to say that we're in the process of looking into purchasing those materials. And even as of today, Mary Bridges, who heads up that area of social emotional learning for the district, has met with high school principals to decide how they're going to utilize those resources throughout the course of the day. And next, we will meet with middle school principals. In our elementary schools, we intertwine SEL with health, and that takes place at least once a week at our elementary schools. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's so great to hear, because I know that post-pandemic, we have students with some serious mental health issues and some needs, and I just want to make sure that we're holistically educating the whole child. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Castro-Dental. Oops.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about our ability to offset the reduction in our K-3 class size amendment dollars. Are we able to use some of those dollars to kind of help make our K-3 classes more acceptable?
So that's probably too specific. That's a question that we would probably have to ask for some guidance on. I will tell you our plan, and the board has heard this before, especially in our most needy schools. Number one, you would probably consume large revenues if you tried to do that across the board. But in our most fragile schools, most needy schools, we are pushing in additional resources, purchased back some teachers that would have been without employment for next year due to enrollment issues, and putting those teachers into classrooms during the ELA and math blocks specifically. That is our strategy. That is our big bet. so that you have 2 actual certified teachers in the classroom during those critical instructional periods. Whether or not you can use ESSER dollars to try to divide out and further decrease class size remains to be seen. You may recall, Dr. Castor-Dental, the research showed unless you're able to squeeze out to get them down to 12 or so, what the state has done for class size really is not supported by research to have a huge impact on student learning. But if you've got 2 teachers during those instructional periods that are pretty critical, we believe we can see a greater outcome from our investment. I'm glad you brought that up, though. There is no definitive answer other than research doesn't support what we've done in class size reduction impacting student achievement all along.
Okay, thank you for that. And I might just add, if you were to ask the teachers if a class size reduction makes a difference in their ability to teach, they would definitely say yes. So maybe we're not asking the right questions when we're looking at what makes the impact. One student can make a huge impact on the rest of the students in the class. So
I would agree. Let me be clear. The research is purely around student outcomes. I don't doubt that we need those dollars invested. I think we come closer to the ratio by doing it our way instead of doing what the state did previously.
I understand. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. Also, finding substitutes I know is difficult. And I know that we outsource with a private company, but are we able to have discussions around increasing substitute pay so that we can get those quality subs and actually fill those absences when teachers are not there?
Madam Chair. Absolutely. So we are able to consider that as a means of our investment, because we are supposed to be investing in order to positively impact student learning loss. And so we believe we can sell that as one of our investments. I want to also point out this past year, it's noteworthy that our sub-fill rate went down. I believe people were afraid. Think COVID-19, prior to vaccines, our substitutes were turning down possible jobs, I believe, on a regular basis. So hopefully this year with the vaccine, we'll see an increase in our substitutes, and Kelly would be more than happy to talk with us about having any kind of enticement. They usually tier some of their enticement. If you work this many days, you can make more money. They do a great job at trying to make sure our highly qualified subs especially are enticed to work more days. But hopefully with the vaccine, we'll see an improvement again compared to what we saw this year.
All right, thank you. Another question about that. Having worked in different schools with, in different communities with different makeups, I know that there is a disparity in different schools and their ability to fill substitutes. Can we consider looking at not necessarily permanent subs, but calling them full-time school-based substitutes so that we don't have schools that are at such a disadvantage and that we have people who know the students really well going into those classes when needed?
So that question has come up before. When we used to have permanent subs, our fill rate was in the 80s and below, because the permanent sub can only cover one class. What we did get great outcomes for was offering an additional stipend or an additional hourly rate of pay in our neediest schools, and then we were able to level the playing field so that they did have coverage similar to those schools in the suburbs. And so that's where we got the greatest impact. Permanent subs, along with their benefits, did not get us the fill rate that we were looking for. Paying more for some of our neediest schools, I believe it was a stipend, a $10 increase. So maybe other schools got 90 and you got 100 if you went to one of our neediest schools. That leveled the playing field for us. We were able to get that coverage.
So are we doing that still?
That's still in place. But this year, all bets were off because everybody was short of subs, but we still have that in place.
I would just like to recommend more than a $10 difference. Okay, thank you.
Member Byrd.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. The ESSER 1 funds, those Those are expenditures that we were kind of reimbursing things that we did last year, correct? Is that correct?
That's partially correct.
Okay, so like the swivel cameras, those were purchased last year for launch ed.
Yeah, so something that you got out of fund balance, you can reimburse yourself for at this point.
Okay, so we currently have these swivel cameras that we may or may not be using now, right? Okay. The $11 million for employee retention, can you, where did I see that? Can you explain what that was for? And I don't know where it was found, but.
That expense was for custodial costs for bus drivers and for bus monitors for when the schools were shut down from March to May of 2020.
Ah, gotcha. Perfect. Thank you. Would it be possible for us to get a list of the loss of learning materials? We have it's a pretty big chunk of the money that went to loss of learning materials, 20 million. Is it possible for us to kind of get a breakdown of where that 20 million?
Absolutely. Yes, we'll get that to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Has there been any indication yet about ESSER 3? Any idea on like a timeline for spending for that? It has to be, do we know when that has to be done?
We anticipate through September of '23.
Okay. The COVID-19 health insurance claims 12.8 million. Can you explain that one a little bit? I'm trying to understand why that came out of ESSER money.
That's where we need Doreen. We're going to turn that over to Doreen. on
Yeah,
that
I can
question.
tell you the short version as Doreen's making your way. So if you had expenditures for both healthcare needs, in your sick leave, in your benefits or health insurance plan, you can claim those now from ESSER. And you'll hear later on in our closed session some of the issues where the healthcare plan had some deficits. You heard it partially when Ms. Conkerline was speaking. You can reimburse some of those expenditures if they are COVID-related costs.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you. And I just wanted to kind of give my 2 cents on the telehealth, setting up a teleroom. I'd had a discussion with Mary Bridges about this because we had a community partner that received a huge grant to do telehealth, mental health counseling, and we were trying to work on a way to do that. I think one of the obstacles was providing privacy to a student for that and still providing supervision. So that was where I think we were trying to figure that out, but if we can figure that out, I think it would be phenomenal. I also think there's a lot of, as Member Gallo said, there's a lot of parents that, can't take off work necessarily to do doctor's appointments. And also in my community, we have a lot of migrant workers that are a little hesitant about going all the time to doctor's offices. So I think providing those resources for some of our, real needy schools would be really beneficial. Thank you.
Absolutely. I neglected to say, we also have a grant for this upcoming year from Central Florida Cares to pilot telemental health in some of our schools. So we'll be working with them in order to make that happen. And as Dr. Jenkins mentioned previously, we already have piloted telehealth in some of our schools, so we'll be looking to expand. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Lopez?
Thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions. The first one is, are we going to have more mentorship programs in our district with this fund?
for mentorship programs.
Yes.
That is something that we can look at.
And also are going to provide more opportunities to our ESOL students to be part of OCT and magnet programs.
Yes,
I think that is very, very difficult for them to apply for magnet programs. Most of the time, they don't know how to do it, and I know we have a lot of information in our website. But, you know, they have to take other classes because of the language barrier, and this opportunity is always very far for them to achieve.
Yes, thank you.
We can certainly look into that, and I do believe, when Mr. Howard was speaking earlier, if you recall, Member Lopez, we pushed really hard this notion of our speakers of other languages not being penalized if they could pass, for example, the SAT in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Other states were doing it, Texas was doing it, and our state resisted that. We believe what we have is somewhat of a compromise that's going to give us some flexibility where someone who is very fluent in their home language and clearly competent around academic areas can deal with that ELA requirement and not have to be in double blocks, which consume their electives and some of the CTE courses that they could take. So we're very hopeful that this is going to open some additional doors for our students who speak another language but are also clearly competent academically.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to hear that. We have 30 states that have the standardized test in their native language. 33 states. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gould. A couple more questions about supplements. Since they're not necessarily tied to salary, maybe we can have some flexibility with supplements and making sure that those who are doing extra work, that they're receiving their full supplement. Are they fully funded, or have we been paying them? Have they been receiving their full supplemental pay?
So the answer should be yes. If they qualify or are identified by their principal for a supplement, then they should be receiving that. The creative nature around compensation is something we'll discuss more in closed session.
Okay. Another idea, maybe you'll discuss this in our closed session, but for our bus drivers, when they are not driving the bus in between their runs, is there an opportunity for them to be paid mentors for some of our students? Huh. It's a good question.
Certainly, there are lots of creative things that we might be able to come up with. Bus drivers do sometimes have supplemental duties so that they can be paid more hours. Doesn't always work over the summer, but many of our bus drivers, for example, have helped when we do our IT return of our digital devices and inventory. Many of them have helped out with food services, distribution of meals over the summer. And so certainly that's another possibility as well that would have to go through collective bargaining.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. I have no more speakers. I think that I think you heard a lot of where our priorities were, and that's the beginning of this discussion, not the end of the discussion, certainly. And at this point, I'd like to turn it to General Counsel.
Members of the board, we do have a closed session regarding collective bargaining immediately following this. Please feel free to take a convenience restroom break, and we will meet you upstairs. Conference room, 9th floor.
Thank you. With that, this work session is concluded.